Paul Levy, on behalf of the three Baldwin brothers, Michael and Ian, and Philip Baldwin, and the Marion Institute, welcome back to the Three Brothers Quest.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you for the invite.
We're so happy to have you. And this is our second conversation. In our first conversation, we'll put the show notes, the link in the show notes. You and I discussed your masterful The Quantum Revelation, which is now available in a second edition. Today, we're going to consider a topic that you have written actually not one, not two, but three books about. And this is this notion of Wetiko. Wetiko. And I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is your most recent book called Undreaming Wetiko, Breaking the Spell of the Nightmare Mind Virus. Can we begin, Paul, with the origins of this notion, and I'm using the word notion, I'm not sure that's even the right word,
Hmm.
of Wetiko?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was tracking this, whatever you call it, for decades because it was showing up in my life, in my family, in my world, in my mind, but I didn't have a name for it. And then I came across the Native American term Wetiko, and my brain kind of exploded because I realized, oh my God, they've been tracking this for centuries. And then I began to realize not just the Native Americans, but every spiritual tradition based on wisdom has had their own name and their own sort of symbol system for articulating this thing. And you could think of it as a mind virus. The idea being that the origin, is in the human psyche, and it's a cannibalistic spirit. So, in other words, it really, one very simple way of thinking about it is that it has everything to do with evil, but this mind virus is a quantum phenomena. And what I mean, just like in quantum physics, what is the nature of light? Well, depends how you observe it. It's a wave or a particle depending on the observer. Same thing with Wetiko, that it contains holographically enfolded within it the deepest evil imaginable that our species is capable of. And holographically encoded within it is also its vaccine or its medicine, its own cure. And not only does it contain its own cure, it's actually helping us to potentially awaken to our nature. But if we don't have the recognition of what it's showing us,
Mm.
then it'll just assume its program function of killing us. And so, what I've been pointing out, how come I've written three books about it, is that, I mean, for example, traditions that have gotten turned on to it, like, I think of the Castaneda books and Carlos's teacher, Don Juan, he didn't have the name Wetiko. He called it by different names, the predator being one of them. But he says this is the topic of topics. And I fully agree. There's nothing more important in the
Mm.
world to understand, for the simple reason that if we don't understand Wetiko, there won't be a human species. And one way of understanding Wetiko, very simply, it's this revelation. It's a living revelation, but it's a revelation through the dark. It's not like, oh, here God is coming down from in a beam of light from the heavens above. No, this is a revelation coming through matter, coming through the shadow, coming from
Mm.
the underworld. And if we don't recognize what it's revealing to us, then we're doomed. But if we recognize the revelatory function that is being offered to us, it unlocks the most incredible creativity,
Mm.
compassion, wisdom. It unlocks our nature, really.
So let's pause there for a moment because that was a beautiful contextualizing of this phenomenon, Wetiko. So you are saying that Wetiko could be understood as many things, and this is what struck me in reading all three books. Wetiko is a cannibalistic spirit that embodies in some ways evil, however we imagine that. Wetiko is also, you say, a revelation or can be used that way. Wetiko is a nightmare mind virus. Wetiko is a psycho spiritual blindness. And lastly, you just hinted at this notion that Wetiko is also a quantum phenomenon. So
Yeah.
that's a lot to unpack. Before we go any further, you mentioned that Wetiko is an indigenous term. Is there a particular indigenous tribe or group that we can give
Yeah, you
credit
can
to
think
here?
of,
Or yeah,
the Cree Indians, the Ojibwe, and there are a lot of different, sort of variations, like
mm,
Wendigo is another sort of
yeah,
variant of the word Wetiko. But just to think of it in the Native American indigenous tradition, by whatever name they call it, Wendigo, Wetiko, they're all pointing at this thing. And one very simple way of thinking about it, it's sort of this multidimensional or higher dimensional energy or spirit.
mm,
Think about it like an archetypal energy that's greater than the personal. It's a transpersonal energy that can, in a literal way, take over a person for whatever moment, such that that person unwittingly becomes an instrument to unconsciously act out this spirit. And when I was saying it's a cannibalistic spirit, having to do with evil, yeah, it can be seen as a vampire, it's a mind parasite. There are all these different ways of articulating the evil aspect of it. But what I'm pointing out is that it's actually so profoundly helpful for, like, if Wetiko didn't exist, we would have to invent it. Seriously, we'd have to
yeah,
invent it because it's catalyzing the evolution of our species.
mm,
Because like instead of like a normal virus where you have antibiotic or whatever, the medicine and it mutates, well, what Tico forces us to mutate relative to
mm.
it. It's helping us to evolve. And yeah, so that's what I mean that it's a quantum phenomena because it contains in its superposition of states simultaneously both the deepest evil and the greatest blessing. But it doesn't exist objectively. There's no, when people hear this idea, oh, there's a mind virus, you see it exists in the collective unconscious of our species, which
Mm,
means we all have it in potential, which is to say it's enfolded throughout the non-local field. But there's nothing to be afraid of. If people hear about this mind virus and get afraid, no,
mm.
it feeds off of fear. That's its superfood. There's no such thing as Wetiko at all. It doesn't even exist, and yet it can kill us. See, that's the paradox, because it doesn't exist objectively. It doesn't exist separately from our own mind. But it's like, that's what I mean, that it's a revelation. It's showing us, it's actually revealing to us our incredible creative power,
Mm.
okay, of the human psyche. But if we don't recognize that, then we unconsciously will use our creative power to destroy ourselves, as is evidenced all throughout the world today.
Yeah, and you're anticipating my next question, Paul. Can you provide us maybe with a couple of specific examples of how Wetiko and where Wetiko manifests? Maybe an example, maybe related to an individual, if you can think of one.
Yeah,
Then
yeah, yeah. No,
also,
totally. Well, I
and
can think of
also,
one. I
yeah.
can think of, like, a way to think about it, like iterations of a recurring fractal. And so on the one hand, I'll think about me. Oh, to the extent that I encountered Wetiko and, was traumatized or abused or whatever, however I would characterize it, to the extent I haven't healed that or integrated that, then to that extent, I'm going to enact self-destructive behavior, in which I become split, and then one part of me attacks another part, or I enact addictive habitual patterns that aren't serving me but are keeping me down. That's just like something I think we all can relate to. I know I certainly can. But then in relationships, I mean, how I first learned about Wetiko is in my family, and the story isn't important, but my father, unbeknownst to me, was taken over by something, and based on his, wounding and trauma and abuse that he didn't deal with. And then because he didn't consciously assimilate his own trauma, he then unwittingly offered himself into the hands of Wetiko so that he acted it out onto the next of kin, which was me. And that's the way, according to the work of when you study Jung, he says evil regenerates itself over the generations. And that's the way that, we all know that, unhealed ancestral abuse. I point out in that book, the On Dreaming Wetiko,
Yeah.
the first chapter, that that's the origin of Wetiko. That's unhealed multi-generational ancestral abuse. That if one person doesn't, stop, do their inner work, stop the chain and integrate it, they're fated to act it out on, the dog, their kids, their wife, their
Mm,
husband, whatever,
mm,
and it just gets passed down again and again until somebody stops the chain. But the third, that's so then there's me as an individual, then in relationships, but then there's the body politic of the world.
mm.
You know, if I couldn't imagine a better marketing department for my work than what's happening on the world stage. If people want to know about Wetiko, we'll just take a look at what's happening, the incredible self-destruction and evil that's getting enacted on a daily basis. Like, just think about it. Our species is investing like maybe the majority of our resources on developing more efficient ways of killing each other.
Mm.
If that's not insane, because Wetiko, it's a collective psychosis. Yeah, it can take over a person, but it can become a psychic epidemic, and then people reinforce each other's madness, by getting into alignment with each other's unconscious blind spots.
Mm.
That's what we're seeing today. We're in the middle of a collective psychosis.
Yeah, I was reminded reading your three books again, Paul, about Wetiko, of Belgian psychologist Dr. Matthias Desmet's
Right,
work on mass formation, which
right,
he popularized in a book a few years ago called The Psychology of Totalitarianism.
right,
And he was drawing on Hannah Arendt's work, as
right.
you do, in your books as well. So this is a collective psychosis. It's a mass formation. It's back to the individual. It feels like individual possession by this animus, this thing called Wetiko. Can you talk a bit more about how your study of Carl Jung has shaped
Yeah,
your
yeah, yeah, for
understanding of
sure.
Wetiko?
Totally. Like, if I hadn't found the work of Jung, I can't even imagine,
Mm,
it so helped me to understand and wrap my mind and find the words around what I was experiencing. And what does Jung say? Jung says the human species has been possessed for centuries,
mm,
and we are in desperate need of an exorcism. And this is the most vital need of humanity. Okay. He literally says that again and again and again in his work.
mm,
In my new book, I'm quoting a lot of those quotes. That's how I know them so well. And what is he? He was completely switched on to Wetiko. He didn't have the name. He kept on calling it by different names. But the one name he called it, I think, the most often was the phrase totalitarian psychosis. Okay. And and just think about how he describes it. He says something gets in our mind in a sense that colonizes our mind, that takes over the executive function of our psyche, that
mm,
creates a shadow government inside of our mind,
mm,
that dictates to the ego such that the ego becomes merely the instrument of whatever this is, right? As he's describing, what happens in an individual person's psyche. Now, just think about what Tico is, an inner disease of the soul that has this magical ability to explicate itself and to elaborate itself through the medium of the outside world, such that it configures outer events to reflect the inner state of a human being in thrall to Wetiko. What I just described, the shadow government, colonizing the psyche, all of those things, that's an inner process that happens in an individual taken over by Wetiko, that's actually getting reflected and expressed via the body politic of the world.
mm.
You see, that's where you begin to see Wetiko, when you begin to realize it's an inner disease of the soul that's revealing itself not only in our minds, but via the medium of the outside world. So when you begin to realize, wait a second, there's a correlation between what's happening in the world and what's happening in my mind. This is Jung's idea of synchronicity. Again and again, he would use the word, this universe is dreamlike. When you begin to recognize the correlation between the inner and the outer, that's when you begin to wake up to the dreamlike nature of reality. And that is actually where the healing of Wetiko is to be found. Because
Mm,
then it's like you're in a dream and you're having a lucid dream,
mm.
and you are actually connected with your creative agency and power that you weren't before the appearance of Wetiko.
Yeah. This explains your use in the subtitle of your book, describing Wetiko as a nightmare. Because if
Right.
we are dreaming, Wetiko is manifests as a nightmare until we wrangle it, if you will,
Yeah.
through ways we can maybe delve
Yeah.
more
Well,
into.
it's the night I coined the phrase. It's the nightmare mind virus because it creates nightmares. Now think about a nightmare. Think about you have this nightmare and it's a recurring nightmare,
Mm,
right? And if you don't get the message, it then, recurs and recurs, typically in amplified form,
mm,
because it's trying to communicate something. And when you get the message and integrate it, then all of a sudden, no more nightmares, no
mm.
more recurring dream. So there's something that's being revealed to us to see this as a dreaming process, what's happening in our world. And if we don't get the message, then we're just fated to just, have a recurring nightmare again. Again, what is the message? I mean, there are a lot of ways of saying it,
Mm.
but one of the simple ways of saying it, it's showing us, it's revealing to us, we have this unimaginably vast creative power in us, all of us. But to the extent that we're not conscious of it and we're not expressing it consciously, creatively,
Mm.
then it gets unconsciously outsourced, and the state or the powers that be pick up our own unconscious power and turn it against us.
Yeah, and it seems like that process then becomes habit. It gets sort of looped into what the brain people call our default mode network, let's say, or the
Right.
Buddhists would call our monkey mind, chattering
Yeah, yeah,
away. And
yeah.
um, I, I was thinking as I was reading this latest Wetiko book, Paul, that ideologies and isms that imprison us seem
Right.
like forms of Wetiko, whether I'm a
Yeah.
leftist
That's
or a
what Jung
rightist
says.
or
Jung says ideologies, isms, ideologies, all of those things are, that is the mind virus. He will actually say that. He goes,
mm,
that's the virus of our time.
okay.
Because then we get, fixed in a viewpoint.
Yes.
And by the power of dreaming, we will then dream up all the evidence we need to confirm the objective truth of our viewpoint. So it becomes self-replicating. And anybody who reflects back like another viewpoint, or that our viewpoint might not necessarily be the only one, or it might not be true, they're considered to be a threat. And then we just attract other people who share our viewpoint, and like this bubble gets conjured up around us, this impenetrable bubble that resists reflection. And I'm describing a collective psychosis. I'm describing what's happening in our world. And one final thing, that's why the profound importance of what I call developing omniperspectival awareness. Instead of just having one fixed viewpoint, think about on the surface of a circle, no, a circle has 360 degrees. What about if you imaginatively entertain as many of the other perspectives on that circle as you can, without being fixed and fixated on one of them?
Mm.
That's in the service of awakening.
It's so beautifully said. Confirmation bias.
Right.
It seems
Exactly.
like it aids and abets Wetiko. Here,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
if
if I can just say about that,
please.
because it's so profound, the confirmation bias, because if you think about it, think about one way of understanding the profundity of Wetiko. Think about if you're in a dream, if you're in a night dream, right? So why don't we invoke our imagination for a second? And if you're holding whatever viewpoint you're holding in the night dream, say, for example, the viewpoint is that the night dream you're in, that it's objective and it's
Mm,
real and it's solid and it's
mm,
separate from you. If that's the perspective that you are holding, what is that night dream? It's nothing other than a reflection of your mind.
mm,
So it'll instantaneously shapeshift and reflect back, giving you all the evidence, confirming your viewpoint, where
mm,
now you have proof. Oh, my viewpoint is correct because I have all the evidence I need. So you get more fixed in your viewpoint that the world that you're in, the dream world, is objective. And the more fixed you are, the more evidence you're going to get from the dream, which is just reflecting your own viewpoint of the seeming objective truth ad infinitum. It's a
mm.
self-replicating feedback loop in which you've hypnotized yourself by your own creative genius. That's a very simple way of understanding Wetiko.
Wow, it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop that hypnotizes us via our own creative genius.
Exactly.
That's an
Exactly. And that's
amazing.
why I'm like, to the extent I'm trying to shed light on this, it
Yeah.
unlocks our creative genius in a way that serves us instead of is killing us.
Yeah. I'm thinking as you're talking here about the power of the internet and algorithms to serve up the same sauce more and more in more and more extreme versions via filter bubbles, et cetera. We surround ourselves with, in a sense, the same perspective amplified. And have you thought about how our digital world, artificial intelligence, so-called chat GPT, et cetera, plays a role in the phenomenon known as Wetiko?
Oh, completely. No, totally. I mean, on the one hand, it can be a great, benefit to humanity, but if gotten into the wrong hands, it can be, unbelievably evil. And there are a couple things. One is for me, the idea of artificial intelligence, it's like if you see this as a dream, it's reflecting back the incredible importance of developing natural intelligence.
Mm,
The natural, just our natural wisdom.
yeah.
But then what happens when somebody gets taken over by Wetiko? Say somebody, we all, who hasn't acted out their unconscious in their lives at certain moments? That's an example. We're all susceptible to falling asleep and becoming an instrument for something other than ourselves, something shadowy or unconscious to act out.
Mm,
But when that becomes the habitual pattern and that becomes their typical state of just being a conduit for Wetiko to act itself out through them, they become programmed like a robot, like an automaton, like a zombie with no creativity programmed in. So that's a real danger. And think about it. For example, I'll talk about me. I'll talk to people about what's happening in the world. And so often I'll feel like I'm talking to the algorithm, like they're just parroting their brainwashing, they're parroting the propaganda, or their mind is being controlled by some sort of, powers that be that want them to think a certain way.
mm,
And they have no idea. They're
mm.
totally oblivious because what Tico is a form of blindness that works through our blind spots, but it's a weird, peculiar form of blindness that actually thinks
Mm,
it's sighted. And not
mm.
only that, it thinks it's more sighted than people who actually see.
What are some telltale signs, Paul, that you're talking or interacting with another human who is under Watiko's influence? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, I just noticed, I mean, I become really sensitive and sensitized to that. So I'll feel, in my body certain things. But, there's just a sense when you have, like, for example, when somebody will have a viewpoint, right, about what's happening in the world, and you share with them, oh, here's another viewpoint that is just as credible, that contradicts their viewpoint. If they have no curiosity at all about, oh, that's interesting. Oh, let me research that. Having that no curiosity is one of the spore prints of Wetiko. So one other one would be not really being interested in self-reflection at all.
Mm,
Like a third one would be if they're not expressing themselves creatively in their life, in their day-to-day life. And that doesn't mean they have to be painting or drawing. No, just the way we go about our day can be creative,
mm,
So
mm.
just as examples.
Yeah, I was thinking quite a bit about curiosity as kind of a human superpower. Um,
Well,
quite a
that's what
bit.
Einstein said when asked, "What makes you such a genius?" He says, "Well, I'm not really a genius. It's more just I'm incredibly curious." And I think he coined the phrase like holy curiosity, that it's a
Mm,
really sacred quality,
mm.
And
Ooh.
I see that some of my friends are incredibly curious when they come across information that might contradict their viewpoint, but other people seem to just be, their curiosity is like just compartmentalized and shut down.
Yeah, I've been struck by how many humans I seem to run into who are decidedly incurious.
Yeah,
It's very strange.
totally.
Yeah, it's very strange. Pivoting a little bit, can you speak to how your practice of Buddhism has maybe deepened your understandings of Wetiko over the years?
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. And so I've been a practicing Tibetan Buddhist for like, I don't know, 40, 45 years, something like that. And I mean, it saved my life in the sense that it's given me real insight into the nature of my mind, and because it's really easy to project and to project our shadow and to think, oh, the source of our problem is out there, and then we react to it as if it's out there, and then that just becomes a feedback loop, which whatever. I mean, that's samsara, cyclic existence, type of thing. That's really the source of suffering. And what Buddhism has really helped me is that it's given me insight, like what the Buddha discovered in essence. He was an incredible doctor, and he was like, in a way, a doctor of the soul. And he discovered a cure for a disease. And the disease he discovered the cure for was suffering. And he realized the cause of our suffering, you could call it clinging, like this grasping onto a sense of self, that I exist as a separate self.
Mm.
And he realized there is no such thing. And then we spend our whole lives protecting and defending this imaginary sense of self, which is self is an illusion. And this is Wetiko. Wetiko, in essence, is a misidentification of who we think we are. When you see, if I'm in a dream and if I'm imagining myself to exist as a skin encapsulated ego in third dimensional space and time as a separate self, then I'm going to dream up all the evidence confirming that's who I am. And then I'm just, I've created, this whole illusion based on my incredible creative genius for creating reality. So what Buddhism is really, openly showing us is that our situation is not problematic in the way we've been conditioned to think it is. In other words, what that means is that we have gotten into an unconscious, chronic, habitual pattern of contracting against our own light. And that gets rendered into the unconscious so that we don't even know we're doing it.
Mm.
And then it's like our chronic state that we just are continually contracting against our nature. And what the Buddha was after was like, there's no one else doing that to you. You're doing that. You've gotten in the unconscious habitual pattern of contracting against your light. That's the clinging. That's the grasping.
Mm.
That's the misidentification with like that you exist in a way that you don't as a separate self. And the whole teaching of the Buddha is just stop doing that. You don't have to do that. And then that energy that you were investing in the clinging, in the grasping, in the self-contraction becomes available to you for love, for compassion, for being creative. That's our nature.
Wow, beautifully said. I wanted to ask you about in Buddhism the four valued logic.
Yeah.
That was a new concept for me, and it feels very quantum.
Yeah.
Four valued logic. Can you
Totally.
talk?
It is.
Yeah, can you talk a bit about
Yeah, yeah,
four
yeah,
valued
sure.
logic?
So, and I talk about like, so in Tibetan Buddhism and in quantum physics, and when you really study, this being a dream, there's two valued logic where things are either true or false.
Mm.
But all of those, Buddhism, dreaming, quantum physics, have what's called four valued logic. And a very simple way of understanding, instead of something being true or false, things can be both true and false. So they can be A and B instead of A or B. And it's a higher form of logic, and it involves like a more expanded consciousness to be able to hold these seeming mutually exclusive, contradictory opposites. In a way, it segues into one of the major things of Jung. He talks about holding with consciousness the tension, the creative tension of the opposites. And you're
Mm.
able to hold the opposites that are contradictory, that are mutually exclusive, and hold them both together without splitting. What most people do is it's so painful, they just identify with one of the opposites and then they repress and project out the other. Jung says when you do that, you will develop a dis-ease in your soul. You'll get sick. You
Mm.
can even die. But if you hold that creative tension of the opposites, this is having to do with four valued logic, where you're able to hold these contradictions and not just prematurely decide on one and then exclude the other, but hold both. Out of that, Jung says, comes the transcendent function, or he calls it the reconciling symbol. Another simple way of saying that, out of that comes grace. Out of that comes the creative, holy, and whole-making spirit.
Mm.
And so our role in all of this is when we're confronted with those opposites, and Jung is saying those opposites are intrinsic to our nature, to the divine. If we don't dissociate and project out what a lot of people do, oh, they project out the darkness and I'm all light and the evil's out there, and then they will dream up all the evidence they need. And meanwhile, I mean, I can go into that's a really sort of profound psychological way of understanding Wetiko. But instead of splitting and sort of disassociating, which Jung says is the sickness of our time, to be able to hold those tension of the opposites, and that's to cultivate the four valued logic that's actually comfortable with holding, things that seem to be contradictory points of view simultaneous. Out of that expands our consciousness.
You're so adept at explaining this, Paul. In quantum physics, light is both a wave
That's a perfect example. And
a
those
particle.
you couldn't imagine more mutually exclusive opposites.
Yeah, yeah. And yet in quantum physics, light performs in a both and fashion.
Yeah, and what they found is that it's a function of how it's observed. So in other words, if you think about us, and we're like that photon, we're like that light that contains the whole multiplicity of selves, like transparency superposed on each other. We, contain all the full spectrum of our nature. And yet when we interact with someone, they dream up a certain part of us, which then we then step into. And as soon as we step into that part, then they have all the evidence, oh, that is who we are. So now, it's more likely that they will, next time they see us, invoke that same part. It's one of the ways of understanding this being a dream, and that we are dreaming up out of the infinitude, certain aspects of the universe, but then where the unconscious comes in is then we then assume that that's the reality, instead of just like, oh no, that's just one part of this, multidimensional hologram of this person. But I'm talking about not just with people, but with the universe as a whole.
Yeah.
Quantum physics is saying this universe that we are in right now, this physical universe, is pulsating in and out of the void every nanosecond, refreshing itself anew. But we don't have the perceptual apparatus to see that. We impute a continuity, a solid continuity, thinking it's the same universe. But no, each and every moment, it's completely revealing itself in a new way, and it simulates, it looks just like the previous moment, but it's actually different. What that means, you see, the greatest discovery of the 20th century in physics, according to one physicist I know, is the malleability and the mutability of this universe, that this universe is not written in stone, but it's malleable. And it's a function of our consciousness, of how are we dreaming it.
Astonishing. You write, just to put a bow on four valued logic from Buddhism, this is, you write, the logic of interdependence, wholeness, and the unity of all things.
Yeah.
Even as you say, and maybe we add the malleability and the mutability in flow, if you will. It's a really profound notion.
Yeah, and if I could just say, like, one way of understanding that is that there's no separate self to be found anywhere. There's no separate things to be found anywhere. Everything is interdependent with everything else. So in other words, I don't exist as a separate self. I only exist in relation to you. And you don't exist as a separate self. You exist in relation to other things. So everything is interdependently, having a relationship with everything else. And there's no one thing
Mm,
that's immutable. That's like, the separate self or the separate thing anywhere. This is why quantum physics was so radical. It realized there aren't even any things called things,
mm,
that everything is one whole seamlessly interconnected quantum system.
mm,
That's the realization of our wholeness,
mm.
or you could say of our holiness,
Yeah.
and when you see that, that's the four valued logic. That's the sort of awakened consciousness that
Mm,
sees the dreamlike nature, that recognizes that, wait a second, we're actually not separate. We're interdependent. We're interconnected.
mm,
And energetically, the expression of that realization is compassion, is love.
mm, mm. I'm reminded, Paul, of our first conversation about the quantum revelation, where you described the discovery of quantum physics as it's a terma. Am I getting the term correct?
Yeah,
Terma.
yeah, Terma. Yeah, yeah.
And could you remind us of this notion
Yeah,
of terma?
yeah, yeah. Terma is such a mind-blowingly psychoactivating, profound idea. And it's found in Tibetan Buddhism, but every spiritual tradition, every tradition has the idea that there are hidden treasures, these spiritually sort of like liberating treasures hidden within, the multidimensional fabric of the universe, including within our minds. So, now Tibetan Buddhism is really so codified and mapped this phenomena of terma. So, in other words, say if the community they're doing practice and they get a little bit stale, a little bit one-sided,
Mm,
they fall a little bit asleep, all of a sudden there'll be a terma that will be discovered, whether it'll be a sacred object or a prayer or a visualization or a mantra, that actually found in the actual physical world or within a person's mind. And one way of understanding that, it's a dreaming phenomena, because it's a known thing. The unconscious compensates a one-sidedness. So when an individual gets one-sided, the unconscious presents a symbol that if they get into resonance with, will bring them back into balance. That's a way of understanding a terma. And it's a real thing. I mean, this isn't like a fairy tale. Scholars study this stuff. And so I'm pointing out that quantum physics can be seen to be a modern day analog to a terma. And
mm,
what I specifically mean is because we've gotten so one-sidedly entranced by the viewpoint of scientific materialism, where we think this world exists objectively separate from us and that matter is the primary stuff. All of a sudden, here, into the world and into our minds 100 years or so ago comes quantum physics, which is empirically proven. There is no such thing as an objective world. There are no such things as things. The primary stuff is consciousness. But like the normal quantum physicists, they didn't sign up for this. Because it's widely considered to be the greatest discovery ever in all of history. That there's no debate about, but everybody is like, there's a big controversy. What does it mean? And here, I'm not a physicist at all. I'm just a curious person.
mm,
And in my study of quantum physics, I realized what it means. My offering is that it's literally revealing to us that we are having a collectively shared dream, which is exactly what the Buddha is saying, which is exactly what Jung was plugged into.
mm. Before we maybe end with ways we can wrestle with Wetiko and in promising ways, I suppose. Can we push on this notion for just a moment of how Wetiko and your work illuminating, let's say, Wetiko has been received out there in the larger world? What's been
Yeah,
the
yeah.
reaction over the past 10 years or so?
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people, myself included, feel like, yeah, I've been a little bit ahead of my time, because how I discovered it was just from the most immense over the top suffering based on
Mm,
this trauma and,
mm,
stuff that happened, with my father and my family that almost killed me and totally destroyed my family. But it was
mm,
so extreme that it propelled me to connect with, to discover Wetiko in my own life and, connect with quantum physics and all that. So I think I've been a little bit ahead of my time in a certain way, but more and more people, because, this work is getting out, it's like seeding all over the world. and beginning to blossom. And more people are like, when they come across my work, like, if it's a mainstream person, they might read my stuff and go, oh, that's interesting, or oh, that's a theory. But then
Mm.
people, typically people who've really gone through their own initiatory ordeal and have suffered and have been traumatized and dealt with evil or addiction or whatever, you know, when they find my work on Wetiko, basically their heads explode and they're like, oh my God, these are the words describing the universe that I've been trying to
Mm.
navigate,
Mm.
for the last however many years. So I think it's more and more actually really getting out. And I'm just praying because it's the medicine. And I'm just an ordinary person. This has nothing to do with me. I'm just based on my own encounter. Because one way of describing my process with my father, I had a direct, unmediated encounter with archetypal evil. And, I was just a young 20-something-year-old kid, in my early 20s. And, it radically changed the trajectory of my life. And for whatever reason, I was fortunate not just to become like totally screwed up, only partially screwed up, but the idea of that I was able to like somehow try to understand, what am I encountering? What is this?
Mm.
And then of course that segued into the question of who am I? And so more and more as I've integrated what I encountered and have creatively expressed it in my work, through, for example, the three Wetiko books, more and more, I think people are beginning to recognize, because I think people sense there's something going on here. And when people hear about a mind virus, it can sound all like woo-woo or new agey. All that it means is that the origin of the collective madness that is happening in our world is to be found within our psyche.
Mm.
And that's a no-brainer. Where else can the origin and the solution of our collective madness be found but within us? And this is exactly what Jung was saying. He was saying the way to heal the insanity, the collective psychosis in our world, is via the individual. That we just can't create a new law or like rules or regulations. No, any one person. And Jung was really tapped into
Mm.
any one person doing their inner work and seeing Wetiko, shedding light on their shadow, having the recognition of their quantum nature, of their Buddha nature, seeing the dream. There are a lot of ways of saying the same thing. What Jung was really tuned into, any one of us seeing that might be the very act that precipitates a global awakening in the collective unconscious of our species.
Like that extra crystal of sugar in sugar
Right?
water that.
Right. When you have a glass of water and you add grains of sugar and it just dissolves and dissolves and it reaches saturation point, add one more grain of sugar, a crystal
Mm.
manifests. That's exactly it. If one,
Mm.
even if our listeners right now gets what we're talking about to a different degree, that could be the grain of sugar that catalyzes a global awakening. And that's incredibly hopeful. And quantum physics says the same thing in its own way.
Mm. Before we talk about solutions, Paul, you're working on a new book about
Yeah.
Jung. Could you just briefly describe what you're up to, since you seem to be like channeling Jung right now, which is so beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
your
yeah.
tell us in a sentence, what's your new book about
Yeah,
or going
yeah,
to be
yeah.
about?
Well, what it's about. So when I had a dream of Jung, a few months ago, where he had read my work and was so happy, and then I got to meet him, and he was so happy to meet me, and it was like he was blessing me. And when he died, he, openly was sharing that he felt like a failure, that he failed to open people's eyes, is the phrase he used, that there's a treasure. Think about a terma. It's a treasure. There's a treasure hidden in the field. I would say in the non-local field of the universe, and that people didn't understand.
Mm.
And he felt the greatest discovery and achievement of modern psychology was what he called the reality of the psyche, that the psyche is fundamentally the most real thing in the universe. And but according to the typically agreed upon, the scientific materialist point of view, that matter, is the fundamental stuff, and that, stuff in our minds, that's just not real. Where he was saying, no, there's another, the psyche and the manifestations of our psyche, they're not objective, but they're not just mere imaginings that are nothing.
Mm.
It's like he discovered another world. It's the world of shamans and visions and dreams. People doing plant medicine a lot of times will tap into this vision. And he says, this is the place where we can actually really heal, what ails our species. And the thing that blows me away, I've read Jung a million. I have everything he's ever,
Mm.
like written, and I've read every Jung book in the world by all the Jungians, and hardly anyone is talking about Jung's greatest discovery. So with most people, they've never even heard about the reality of the psyche. Hardly anybody even understands what it means,
Mm.
and no one's writing about it. So, I just by following my process, all of a sudden I feel like, oh my God, this book is coming through.
Mm.
And so the title of the book, at least tentatively, Jung's Reality of the Psyche, the greatest discovery that no one's ever heard of.
Well, I look forward to that
Oh, and
conversation.
if I could just say one thing,
Of
the
course.
reality of the psyche, think about it like a jewel. There's the quantum, there's dreaming, there's Wetiko, and the reality of the psyche. Those are the four aspects of the jewel that illumine and complete each other.
Mm. I see that. So beautiful. Yeah. Well, we'll put a pin in this and we'll come back to the new book when it's available.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
end, Paul, with how we as individuals and perhaps collectively can wrestle, Wetiko wrestle. I liked it. I've been saying. You
Right.
mentioned the importance of humility, the importance of
Yeah,
curiosity,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the importance of reflection and maybe self-reflection as
Yeah,
parallel.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, you write in Undreaming Wetiko, creativity is a healthy response to the dis-ease of Wetiko. And you mentioned that a little bit at the beginning. Can we push on that for a moment? What do you
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
What do
yeah,
you mean
for
by
sure.
that?
So think about it. So like what Wetiko is, it's a form of blindness, and that's really what our species has fallen into.
Mm.
And there's nothing stopping us from seeing. All we have to do is open our eyes and look. It's staring us in the face. Whether you call it Wetiko or the quantum or Buddha nature or the dreamlike nature. And the idea is the greatest protection against Wetiko, or the greatest medicine, is to connect with who we are, with our nature. Okay. But that's such a cliche. What does that even mean? What is our nature? And I point out in my work, well, our nature by its very nature is creative.
Mm.
So when you realize your nature, you embody and express yourself creatively.
Mm.
And the more you do that, the deeper you realize your nature in a positive feedback loop that creates light upon light in a world of darkness. So it circles back again to the profound importance of being creative, because we're being creative every moment anyway. Some people are so unbelievably creative, they create the experience for themselves of not being creative. And by their creative genius, they will draw all the evidence confirming how uncreative they are. That's what creative
Wow.
geniuses we all are. And when enough of us access and realize consciously our creative nature and connect with each other, right? It's what I call, we can dream ourselves awake. And
Mm.
this is to realize that we can consciously step into our own evolutionary process and wake ourselves up. This is what's being offered to us by the universe.
Mm.
And all we have to do is recognize it.
Do you have any recommendations, Paul, for daily creative? I'm going to use the word protocols. I don't love that word, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking of breath work, yoga, cold plunging,
Yeah, yeah.
plant
There's all that stuff.
medicine.
Like for me, what I see, because I'm in private practice, and everybody I work with at a
Mm.
certain point, quite often the first session I'm like a heat-seeking missile. Like, what about your creative process? And typically people are like, oh, I'm blocked, I'm stuck, I'm having resistance. And I'm
Mm.
like, okay, slow that down. What's your experience? When you want to be creative, what happens?
Mm.
And so that edge is really, really important. Like, what do they do when you
Mm.
want to be creative and you feel that resistance? And I've learned, the greater the resistance, and I've learned from my own experience, the greater the potential breakthrough. Okay. And this ties into Wetiko. the great, as we get closer to the light, the greater the darker forces, the more fearsome is their display. And it's easy to interpret that like, oh, wow, things are really bad. I'm being assaulted by demons. But if you actually have the realization, oh, wow, well, that's because you've never been so close to your light. So the idea is to create a container. Like for me, every morning I write. I don't talk to anybody. I don't see anybody. I don't do anything other than that's where I write. And sometimes I'll write pages and pages, and other times it'll be a sentence. But the point is, I'm offering to my unconscious a container for, because I'm busy the rest of the day seeing people or teaching or having groups or whatever, where all of us, no, I'm like offering my unconscious, here's a vessel for you to flow in, and I'm committed to that, and quite often just doing that will all of a sudden, you're like creating the space for the creative spirit in you that's thirsting to express itself, that's thirsting to have realization of itself through you. All of a sudden, now it has a space and a time to manifest.
That's beautifully said. You say back to light and darkness, the light is revealed not in the darkness, but through the darkness.
Yeah, like on the one hand, light reveals darkness. That's one of its functions. But what I'm pointing out is that light in this moment in time, yeah, it reveals darkness, and it is revealing itself through the darkness. This is very Kabbalistic and very alchemical. In the Kabbalah, they talk about, what is it? The ascent on, or like the descent on behalf of the ascent, I think is what it is. It's a phrase where you make a descent into the underworld. So if I can just connect one other thought, that is, I point out in my work, I think it's the biggest chapter in that book, in Undreaming Wetiko, that our species, that the major archetype that's activated in our species is the shamanic archetype.
Yeah.
And a shaman, no one in their right mind would ever choose to be a shaman. The suffering is just so over the top. It's something that one gets called to do. And our species is being called, to become a shaman. And a shaman is the wounded healer. A shaman is the creative artist. A shaman is the dreamer and the storyteller. And what happens when you get called? If you get called to be a shaman, which we all are being called right now, if you like don't assent and say, no, it's inconvenient, I'm not good enough, well, then typically you fall ill. But if the shaman ascends to the calling, what happens next? They make a descent into the underworld of the unconscious, the place of demons and darkness and death and evil. And that it's a dangerous situation. Just think about what's happening collectively. Our species is making a shamanic descent into the underworld. It's a place of death and rebirth. But the point is to not get stuck there. That's the danger. But the shaman who's being called at a certain point, they've integrated enough, they ascend back into our world bearing gifts from the ordeal, and the gifts is the creative spirit. And so we are all being called to be shamans. We are all being called to be creative artists and wounded healers, that the wound is the portal through which we access our creative genius. And to the extent that any one of us that we do that, and particularly when we connect with each other, then we can activate what I call the collective genius, where in a sense we can conspire to co-inspire each other. And that's a real conspiracy theory, where we can, like I was saying before, we can dream ourselves awake. We can help to wake each other up. It's not a competitive sport, who's more awake, you or me. But if I help you awaken, it helps me because we're not separate. All of this is stepping out of the separate self. The separate self is Wetiko.
You just used one of my favorite words, conspire, from the Latin spiritus or
To breathe
spira,
together.
which means breath. So when we conspire, we are literally breathing together for a strategic creative purpose.
Yeah. And the purpose is just like to conjure up, what's in service to the whole, to all of us, to the best, that we're not just coming from our own selfish, narcissistic agenda, but no, it's coming from a whole different point of view that we're all in this together. Like Jung says, we're all being cooked in the soup together, and we can actually recognize that and help each other.
Yeah, yeah. One last question. You do something really fun in Undreaming Wetiko.
Yeah,
You have all of these acronyms,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it reminded me of the importance of playfulness and humor as antidotes to the dis-ease of Wetiko. Can you just say a word about what you're
Yeah,
up to there?
yeah. So no,
Yeah,
it's great. I had so much fun making
yeah,
these acronyms,
yeah.
for processes that we all experience, but we don't have the names for. So on the one hand, it's super cool creating new forms of language
Yes.
to keep
Yeah,
up with our expanding consciousness. On the
yeah.
one hand, that's great. On the other hand, is the profound importance of making light. We need to make light of our
Yes.
dark situation. An example, like my very best friend and I, we both had a similar experience, 40 plus years ago. We were like, young kids, like 19, 20, 21, whatever we were.
Yeah.
We had this profound awakening. We both got thrown in mental hospitals and almost
Mm,
destroyed. We
mm.
were like tortured and diagnosed and medicated, and it was like a total nightmare. And of course, we both understood at a certain point, oh, this was part of the awakening. This was the descent into the darkness. But when we get together and share what we both had to go through, like there was one time we did this with another friend who hadn't had those experiences, and we would be sharing the horrors that we went through, and we were hysterically laughing. And the friend was just horrified at what
Yeah.
we were describing we went through. But instead of like feeling victimized or taking it too seriously, we were just making light of it. And
Yeah.
what we were doing is making light of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that I'm really glad I asked that question because I was curious about this.
Oh, what you don't want
Um,
to do is take things too seriously, because then you just get too heavy, and that then you
yeah,
just become a drag,
yeah.
really.
My two favorites, DCDS, dismissing content due to source, and do so, duped into unwittingly supporting the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
really,
totally.
really, it was like its own little terma there at the end of the book. It's like, oh, look, there's a glossary
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
acronyms.
And I've been creating more and more
Yeah,
like of the acronyms. It's like, oh my God, it's such a fun thing, because what I was hoping was that it would psychoactivate other people's psyches and they would start to create
yeah.
acronyms.
Well, it worked. That's exactly what I started doing.
Right.
Yeah,
Awesome. Yeah.
yeah. Well, Paul Levy, I feel like we could talk for hours. Remind us of your website. You have your new book on Jung that will be available soon. Remind us of your website.
Yeah. So the website, if the way I'll say it, if you want to awaken in the dream, go to awakeninthedream.com. So AWKAEN in the dream.com. And a ton of articles all for free, and videos like this. And it's not monetized at all, because this is medicine. I really want to
Mm,
just get it out to people. And
mm.
yeah, people could buy my books or set up a session. But then also somebody, I'm not a tech person. I just write. I barely know how to use a computer. But somebody is creating, what is it called, like Substack, like a Substack
A
page.
Substack.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
So
good.
that's gonna be up maybe in a month or two.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna start teaching every 2 weeks. I'm gonna just, and people could sign up, and I'm just gonna show up
Mm.
and then, give a little talk, and then, have it be, Q&A. And that'll start probably in beginning October.
Oh, good. Yes, Three Brothers Quest is newly on Substack, so we will be sure to find you there when you arrive.
Oh,
And
great.
yeah, and we'll let our audience know too. Well, Paul Levy, it's always such an amazing opportunity to speak with you, and so appreciate you giving us your time this afternoon. And I have to say, on behalf of all three of the Baldwin brothers, Michael and Ian, and Philip Baldwin and the Marion Institute, thanks for being with us on the Three Brothers Quest. And I hope we can do this again very soon.
Yeah, I just can't thank you enough. It's really like my honor. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Welcome back to the Three Brothers Quest. We are considering Paul Levy. Interview number 2 on Wetiko. Brothers, what do you make of Paul Levy?
Well, I, for one, am very challenged. First of all, I thought it was a fantastic interview. I thought you were fabulous, Rob. I think Paul is so incredibly in command of his subject matter. It's wonderful the way he is so uh, clear, and he is so easy to listen to. Now, my problem is, I guess, I don't quite get it. I mean, I understand that we have this Wetiko force, this evil uh, force that is I guess, in today's world, is very much in control. And I get it that we have to acknowledge, wake up, and recognize that it's there in order to get through it, through its shadow, through its darkness, into the light. And I get the trappings of his, talking about the mind virus that it is, and which he's very clear about. But where I go is, why is it there? Where did it come from? And even though it's not objective, it sure seems as though it's very real. I also am rather fascinated by his whole conversation about the need for curiosity, which I think we all enormously resonate with. And the unfortunate thing about isms and taking positions and being habituated and being stuck in thought forms and beliefs and not able to get out of that sort of entrapment, which prevents us from that challenge that is so necessary, that therefore is going to, in some way, transform that, excuse me, that evil force that's capturing us into, or through which we come into a revelation and light and a natural expression of compassion and kindness, etc. So without babbling on too much more, I think it's, of course, fascinating. I'm also fascinated that once again, indigenous peoples all over the world understand this force in various nomenclature. And it shows you again, I assume, the awareness of reality that these original peoples have had for millennia. And that, I think we're just sort of perhaps being given the opportunity with people like Paul to wake up to it today and grapple with it. But I'm grappling. So that's where I'm at. I need help. Ian?
Well, I read the Castaneda books, the Don Juan shaman, forefront figure in those books. In the, I might have started them in the
60s.
70s, and then all the way through the 90s. And at the end, the shaman Don Juan says, and he doesn't use the word Wetiko, this is the topic of topics. Now you have to be aware that you've been taken all over the invisible and visible universe by Don Juan and his conversations with Carlos. So when Paul alluded to that, it rang a real bell. It also, I think, Paul relies on Jung quite a bit. And I think if you're familiar with Jung, that can help kind of grapple with the whole business. I think what I found somewhat novel and interesting is the need to have 360 degrees perspective, which is not natural to us. So we get locked in on our ism, whatever it is, and we think that's the answer. We attach to it. We enact it programmatically, and the results are not good.
Right.
And so the Wetiko, I think, combines Jung's shadow, or that how exactly they're different, I don't know. It combines the ancient figure of the trickster, probably the oldest figure in native cosmology. And for us, Mercury was the trickster. And the trickster figure is a combination of having a lot of knowledge, and particularly technical knowledge, and being very, not wise, but smart, highly intelligent. And now I'm going to jump off the track onto another track, but following this thought of the trickster figure. I think what we're finding with our latest collective seducer, AI, is that it's a trickster. And that brings it in. I'm going a little too far off course, so we'll come back here. I think to the idea that Wetiko, I also found interesting, connected me to Buddhism and to Jungian psychology, is that we identify not just with an ism, but the primal ism, egoism. And that ism, so long as it's ruling us, blinds us. Because as Paul, I think, makes clear in both his conversations with Rob, but especially this one about Wetiko, the separate self, ego consciousness, is unable to jump into the quantum vision that we're all linked. And that interconnectedness, I think he would say, forces us to take account of all beings and all perspectives, which is, as you say, not an easy task. But if we engage in it, we have a chance, I think, of breaking what Joyce called the nightmare, or Daedalus, Stephen Daedalus, one of his heroes, the nightmare of history, which we keep repeating.
Yeah, very good.
And I think what we need to, what I would like to explore, maybe later with Paul, is, yes, it's clear we all have to do what he and Jung and others call individuate, and go through this process of confronting Wetiko, who is very tricky and very clever, and usually outsmarts us to the point where we're not so easily outsmarted. But the problem of your problem of cruelty, I think, remains, because how do you get, what is a critical mass of humans to go from whatever it's called, the 100th monkey to the 99th to the 100th? How does that happen? I would agree it can happen, But when you're talking 8 billion plus people, how does it happen? I mean, it seems overwhelming. I'll leave it there.
All right.
By the way, Rob, I'm looking at Michael the whole time, so I'm not seeing the rest of us.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Ian and Michael. Philip, where would you jump in?
I had a great many diverse reactions to the conversation. I will admit I occasionally was crying out for a simpler language to explain things that I think are fairly commonsensical, with or without Wetiko. And I found myself, as the conversation went on, more relaxed with it than in the first part. It seems to me, and I may be wrong, that the characterization of Wetiko as an evil force is somewhat misleading, which he explained, because this is internal within ourselves, and we ourselves can go through that and come out the other side in sunlight, so to speak. So I felt, well, we characterize Wetiko as evil, and yet it's precisely the thing that we need to embrace to get to the sunny side of affairs. As a total layman, very much steeped in physical activities, I found myself sometimes kind of crying out for there was one thing that I wrote down, that the notion of terma.
Terma.
Hidden, what?
Terma.
Terma, excuse me. Hidden treasures in multi-dimensional fabric of the universe. Hello? That's tough for a brain like mine. And quantum physics is a modern expression of the same. Okay. I'm no Einstein, but I know quantum physics is the scientific proof that all these things are true. And I find myself saying, okay, great, but what good is the scientific proof of these things? What does that do for us? And my gut feeling is probably not a lot. But I'm very sympathetic to Carl Jung. So when he started to talk about that and psyche and so forth, I felt more at home with the conversation, if we could put it like that. Towards the end, he talks about a global awakening. I don't know, maybe I'm too old, but it's a tall order. And at the same time, I was fascinated by his referencing in Jung the reality of the psyche as that having been Jung's greatest discovery. And that weaves back to what I think I was saying at the beginning. This whole Wetiko business is tied up in our psyche over which we have control. That is our choice. It's not some woo-woo force out there bending us out of shape. Personally, I'm comfortable with that. It makes sense to me. And likewise, what makes sense to me is the Buddhist connection. I'm not a Buddhist and I'm very ignorant, but I sense that the Buddhists, which in some ways are perhaps the most sophisticated Aboriginal expression there may be, have a lot of ways of dealing with Wetiko and expressing it. At the end, we talk about humility, curiosity, and creativity.
I agree.
Terrific. Those words I get my mind around. My little brain can handle that.
Yeah.
And I'm on board.
Yeah.
Well expressed.
He says, just one last thing, when he said we can consciously dream ourselves awake. maybe. But yeah, Anyway, I should rest my case with humility, curiosity, and creativity. Yeah.
Yeah.